Welcome, everyone. We're going to start our meeting. Roll call, Susie?
Mayor Brunner,
Here.
Vice Mayor Rich,
Here.
Commissioner Clark,
Here.
Commissioner Collins,
Here.
and Commissioner McDonald.
Here.
Would everyone rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Do we have any comments from any of our commissioners? If not, we'll move right along. Any comments from our manager?
I'll save those for the regular meeting.
Okay. Can I have approval of the agenda?
Move approval.
Second.
We have a motion for approval, a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any comments from the public? I see none. Okay, we will, Jolie, welcome. Nice to see you here this evening.
I've obviously asked the finance director to give a initial budget review or presentation, but for clarification, I need to point out that last year we had this meeting on July 18th. We're a little bit earlier this year, but I moved it up one meeting because I was being asked questions and things. But last year on July 18th when we had the meeting, we didn't have the state revenue numbers yet. So we don't have the state revenue numbers for this presentation. We also don't have final union numbers for either police or fire. And so essentially the finance director has been working with me in putting together a proposed budget, basing primarily the numbers on projections from last year, and they're essentially estimates and they're not real until we get the actual final numbers from the state. However, he's does a pretty good job of forecasting throughout the year. So with that, I will let Jolie take it from there.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Is the mic on? Okay, good. Afternoon, everyone. Here we are again today. As the manager said, when I pulled up to make the presentation, it said we did July 18th last year. So, a little earlier this year, but earlier isn't always better. And taking into account at what we are today is we're letting you know the status of where we're at. This is not the manager's budget. He is not presenting his budget to you today, balanced or otherwise. This is simply a status update of where we're at in the process. We took the 6-month number from the end of March into April. We asked the department heads to begin inputting their number requests throughout the end of April and May. And this is where we are now. What we have done is, and I think it's in the presentation, the manager and I have met with each of the department heads and allowed them an opportunity to describe what some of the requests are. I've been at the game a long time, but even they still ask for something. Sometimes I don't know what it is. So they told us what they are and some of their priorities internally so that we knew possibly what was a must-have versus would like to have. And so that's where we come on this. Let me see, page down. So already this year, the state of Florida moved into a new OASIS system, which is the new way of doing TRIM, the truth in millage legislation that requires us to follow a prescribed procedure for budgeting property taxes and reporting that. Our certification date is still July 1st, even though we received the number somewhat early this year. And for those who aren't familiar, we take the taxable value as presented to us by the property appraiser, divided by 1,000, which is what a mill represents, is the dollar per thousand, and then times our millage rate, which I used the existing millage rate, the current year millage rate. And then for trim compliance, we do per 95%, 95 at least. Some governments, would in the past had manipulated the number, so now it's at least 95 to allow for the early discount payment and possible non-payers. So you can budget less, or you could budget, you have to budget at least 95. You can budget more if you want to try and, play that game, but there's always some people who seem not to pay their tax bill. And that next statement, I believe in repetition. Hopefully one of these years everyone gets the idea. We are required to budget on the DR 420, which is what's released July 1st. After all this is done, we have all of our public hearings, we have all of our meetings, the Value Adjustment Board meets, and you'll have what is the final certified taxable value, which comes out on the DR 422. So when we get the new year 420, the property appraiser will announce that City of Stuart taxable value went up 11%. I say it went up 12 for budgetary purposes. So last year's DR 420 to this year's DR 420 was a 12% increase, which generated $1.8 million in additional ad valorem revenue. Now, this is the history of what the city's taxable values have been. And as you can see, if you're following along, here we are. This study goes from 2001 to the current taxable value is given to us. And you can see here, as we've talked many times, this was our previous highest value at $2.3 billion, and it dipped through the Great Recession or the housing bubble bust here in Florida, and we did not regain that value until 2022. So it took us that long to get back to where our taxable value had been
A long time.
in 2008. This one is where our millage has been. So from 2001, again, the same number, same year, to now, our millage rate in 2001 was 4.0134 mils. Today, in the current year, and what I've presented in this budget is 5 mils. Bless you. So I think it's kind of nice to present that in a span of 24 years, the city of Stuart has not increased the millage a full mil. We have not gone up one full millage in 24 years. So, you know, we've had some high spots and some low spots along the way, but basically over a 24-year period, we have, you know, towed the line and kept the millage there. Next is what the budgeted ad valorem revenue was. Now, the important thing here is it looks very much like the taxable value graph that I showed you just a moment ago. However, it shouldn't have looked that way because, right, the revenue, if you remained at rollback, revenue would have gone here also. So during those years, we actually took, in sum total, a 22% cut in revenues to the city. And, you know, and likewise, we did, you know, we cut services, we did all kinds of other things to do that. Rather than going with rollback rate, we kept our millage the same, which in those years meant a reduction in taxes rather than keeping them the same. Now, this is the graph of what our taxable value has changed by. So this is the percent change from year to year. And as you'll notice, you know, we were climbing very high here with these large increases in those years during the housing boom time. And then as those housing bubble busted, we actually dropped down into negative. And that's why I said all these negative decreases in value actually added up to 22% decrease in value. And then here we are now, we've climbed out of the hole. We actually became net zero again and then back positive, some dips. And now the last 2 years, we had some pretty nice increases. As I always say, if the taxable value of the city appreciates at a fair pace each year, then there's no need to increase the millage or look for other revenue sources because it keeps pace with expenditure increases as well. Now, what's interesting this year is the end of this graph. So now what you'll see, and I zoom in, it's actually been the increase from last year to this year has declined. So we still did have an increase, but not along the same slope. So the city's total taxable value is turning downward in increases and not maintaining that upward increase. The thing to keep important here is that these numbers are basically 18 months behind. So the projects that came online and were CO'd by 12/31, you know, 2 years ago is in this taxable number. That's why this is your 2024 tax roll, even though we're going into the 2025 year. So what has been done or not done in 2024 still is yet to come. Okay, so any projects we did or did not do still comes in the, will be coming to us through the next 2 taxable values. Okay? So, and that's what it is. You're spreading that expense burden and that tax over what's there. So last year we had a 16% increase. This year we only had a 12% increase. Still an increase, but now it's slowing. if we remained flat, let's just say it didn't go anywhere, well, expenses aren't going to remain flat, but the revenue would. So as those new expenses come in, and as I always say, we would never match one-time revenue sources against ongoing expenditures, right? I mean, you can't find a $100 bill on the ground and then say, oh, I'm going to take on a $50 a month internet bill from this $100 bill I found once, right? You have to have an ongoing revenue source to match an ongoing expense. The CRA value. So the CRA increased 22.9%. Again, last year's DR 420 to this year's DR 420. And the base value now from, and we have 4 different base values, but essentially a $299 million base value is now $883 million base value. That generates approximately $2.7 million to the CRA from general fund, which is $500,000 more than last year. So out of the ad valorem that the city collects in the general fund, we then write a check to the city's CRA fund. So we will be writing a check for $2.7 million out of the general fund to the CRA, which is $500,000 more than what we wrote the check for last year. Everyone? Okay, questions are welcome all along the way, and I'm saving them to the end.
Well, could you explain that? Because on the face of it, you're looking at 300 to 8, almost 900. That's almost a 300% increase.
I'm sorry, sir, say that again?
If you look at the CRA value, the base value is increasing almost 300%, and yet we're only getting an increase budgetarily of 22.9%.
Our $3 trillion taxable value divided by 1,000 times 5 equals our 17 million. So that difference between 883 million and 229 million, you divide by 1,000 and multiply by 5. So it's a multiple factor smaller than the general fund.
Commissioner
So-
McDonald?
Yes.
So, Jolie, the $299 million figure, that's the base value from when each phase of the CRA was established, correct?
Yes, sir.
So the increase is of the 883 is over the different year, from the different base years. So
All four of the different
Right.
groupings
every
of the CRA.
expansion of the
Yes, sir.
CRA, whatever the base value was there. So so we've seen in the history of the CRA, we've seen it go up 2.5 times, something like that.
Yes.
Almost 3 times.
Almost 3 times.
Almost
yeah.
3 times.
Almost 3 times. So.
And while that is good news, it also has its own effect because
It's very bittersweet.
right, we are restricted that it restricts those CRA funds to the CRA, and so that money that would otherwise have gone to the general fund is restricted to the CRA, which is what the finance director was just talking about briefly.
Julie, I know this probably isn't a question for you, but do you know when the CRA expires?
We did
39.
the
39,
we
okay.
did the last 40-year thing, right? 20.
I want to be a commissioner in 40 when we have that windfall.
Well, except for that same year, we will lose all of the funding that comes from the county's CRA portion, which is when these CRA numbers are based on our millage rate of 5. The county's millage rate is above 6.5, so the portion of the county contributes to the CRA is more than 50% of the funding, and that will go to 0 that year.
Right.
So much for your windfall.
Well, I mean,
be a sharp stick
it'll
in the
make ends
I'm just talking about general fund.
ends will meet very easily in general fund, but, the projects would come to a halt, so.
Can we, question, Mayor?
Yes.
Is it possible to end a CRA before that scheduled date?
You could, yes, but you would be giving up millions of dollars.
I understand, but if, 2.7 mil is going to CRA from general, maybe there's a point where you would rather have that in the general and just sacrifice the amount that comes from the county. How much is coming from the county right now?
It's like a 60-40 split, so last year they paid us $3.4 million. So whatever their millage lands at this year will be significantly more.
So if it's 2.4 million that's going, like right here, you see $517,000 more that we're paying toward the CRA, they're probably going to be paying about $750,000 more to the CRA.
To the CRA. And
Understand.
I think I said this at a CRA meeting. I popped in one time. Panal asked me to show up. The citizens of Stuart pay the county's general millage. So they pay our millage and they pay the county's general millage, which is more than 6.5. So this is money, this comes out of money that Stuart citizens paid to Martin County, and they get some of it back at least into the CRA. So, you know, we've had lots of arguments over the years about where they spent impact fees or where they spent other dollars in the city of Stuart. This is a direct correlation to money that came out of a citizen's pocket. We're at least getting some of it back into the CRA fund.
Not to beat this to death, my sense is just at some point, you know, like I know public safety is always a big concern. Some of these things that can't, money cannot be spent on if it's tied up in the CRA, and then we're ended up focused on undergrounding power lines or something that maybe to some people might seem less important. But just thinking out loud.
Yes, sir. Any more questions?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I'll go forward.
Proceed.
So now, to keep the expectations real, we'd have to say that 1.8 million in new ad valorem from the 12% increase, less the extra 500 new additional money to the CRA means I really only get 1.3 million in new ad valorem revenue. Okay, so that's what we get from there. The current budget as it stood, and I can tell you right now, I have a lot of sayings I've come up with over 30 years. 5 minutes after I print this, it's wrong, right? Because some employee, you know, reaches their merit, you know, anniversary date, or we fill a position, or someone has a child and changes their insurance coverage to family. So, you know, these numbers are always moving. It's a living, breathing document. It is not $1.2 million out of balance at this very moment. It was $1.2 million the other day. When the manager and I first finished our meetings, we were $2.3 million out of budget, and I just tell everyone, like, don't, you know, take a deep breath. Don't panic yet. It's a long process to get there. So, but as far as we have to put something in writing by a date to meet the agenda deadline, it was $1.2 million that day out of balance. And the other ones, just as you can see there, as things come and go, we'll smooth out the edges. You can see the utility funds are very, very close to reaching the finish line. The CRA, Panal and I have to get together and talk about reimbursements from CDBG, some other things. So again, I don't want anyone to, you know, gulp at these numbers, but this is where we are. And that 1.2 million as of that day, pretty much all the department heads had said, you know, this is what I want, this is my request, and we don't wipe those out. So of course I'm going to show what the manager has to do to get to the finish line to balance this, but that's where we were the day that we finished our meetings with the departments. So some factors of why we're out of balance, and I put a note here. This is almost the exact same slide as last year. The only difference is the state has not posted any revenues yet. Last year we had at least a couple by July 18th. So the manager has not made any cuts yet. He has not reduced anything, but we did meet with the departments. We are still going through what can be funded with impact fees, what can be funded with grants and other opportunities. The grants administrators meeting with each department, trying to see what's available and what can be identified in time to make it to the final adopted document. Of course, if a grant opportunity comes up later, we would do a budget amendment, you know, if it doesn't make it to the printed document in time. And then as the manager started today's meeting with, we do not currently have solid agreements with either of the bargaining units. So IFF and PBA are still at the negotiating table. So we don't know where that's going to wind up yet. And then so the state of Florida for many, many years would deliver their state revenue projections by March, and then they pushed it to April, then they pushed it to June, and then I always say never let a good disaster go to waste. When COVID came along, they said, well, we're not going to have the revenues until August now. So, you know, it used to say July, now it says July, August, so I'm sure we won't have the state numbers until August. They now utilize that time to pencil sharpen a little more. I'm sure they're doing what we do. They don't want to put out a bad number and have to make a lot of adjustments. But as you can see, all of the major revenue sources that we get from the state are not there. This budget that I'm showing you with $1.2 million includes my own revenue projections for some of the numbers that we typically get from them. Here's what we do know. General, let's see, oh, I'm sorry. All right, I'll just shoot it. Our general liability insurance went up 5.3%. That's been incorporated into the budget. That was about $165,000 across all funds. So that was nothing. We took a larger hit last year. This year, luckily, we had some better experience. We didn't have any storms come through, especially when they predict a really bad hurricane season, as they did last year, and then we don't have it. It causes for a larger increase. This year, we didn't. Health insurance is only up 5%, whereas actual dental and vision and the others had no increase for the city. We are cost sharing that with the employees this year, so we are passing on a small percent of that increase to the employees as well as ourselves. And then this is a correction, and I will give this to the clerk's office. I actually kind of inverted that sentence. Elected officials and senior management had no increase, but there was only a 0.06% increase on general employees and a 0.12% increase on public safety. So again, to my surprise, the state of Florida FRS went up, I'm talking we maybe $8,000 in added expense.
Commissioner McDonald.
Hey, Jolie, I see health insurance is only up 5%. So it looks like his health insurance stabilized? Because I remember 10 years ago we were seeing 20 and 30, 40% increases in health insurance. So,
well, again, yes, sir, you're correct. That did happen. However, it's a thing between our TPA carrier and Roz and HR and myself. We do a lot of finagling and haggling, and our TPA does a lot of field work. They deal with a lot of the local governments, and they try to get large discounts for us, even though we're self-insured separately. They still try to pass on those kind of group discounts because they handle the school board and the county as well. So they did a really good job. We had some good experience, better experience last year. The clinic obviously offsets a lot of this. So the clinic that we share with the Martin County Sheriff offsets a lot of our health insurance experience. However, I can tell you right now, we do seem to have some large claims coming through. So, I'm wiring lots of money back up to Cigna right now at the moment. But, we'll see if it falls out. They always have to look at it and say, if it's a big claim, but it's a one-time expense, that won't change your thing. If it's something, ongoing or some kind of, lifestyle illness, then that might drive up our experience. But this year, we're very lucky to only get 5.
yeah, that's what I was actually thinking, because I just remember back in 15, 16, I think especially we got hit exceptionally hard.
Oh, we've been hand-to-mouth before on the health insurance claims.
And it was, to a point where it was impacting our budget.
Yes, sir.
They were so great. And that's when we created the clinic and several other things. We engaged, I think, the Gehring Group. I'm not sure. We still use them?
Yes.
Yes, we do.
Yeah.
I was just trying not to, I guess if they want free press, the TPA I keep referring to as Gehring Group, so yes.
Yeah, they've always done a great job for us, I think. So, but anyways, it's good to see that number's under control. So.
Yes, sir. And as I said, whatever the actuarial assumptions are at the state of Florida, this is actually inverted. It was 0 on the elected officials and senior management and minimal on the regular employees and public safety. And I'll submit that correction to the clerk. So FRS increase was minimal. Now, what we do not know are the union negotiations and the state revenues, as I said. So that's where we are. New positions. Now, as you know, the commission adopted the strategic plan after our workshop down at the Flagler Center, and we developed what was going to be the strategic plan for Stuart going forward. Our prior 5-year strategic plan was very successful as far as what we wanted to accomplish. We've implemented the new one, and per those strategic plan initiatives, you can see that in this budget, along with some other small items here and there in various departments spread out for sustainability and some of the other initiatives in that strategic plan. The police have requested 3 positions, and the fire department has, at least the chief has submitted requesting 3 additional positions, and the fire department chief has submitted requesting 12 additional positions. And so, however, those positions are budgeted at the base salary, the starting salary of year one, and the assumption that they are employee-only insurance coverages and what have you. So this doesn't incorporate anything that the union would negotiate at this point.
I thought it was four, that we needed 4 new police officers.
Oh, is it 4?
Well, it's 3 plus a dispatch.
Oh, yeah, 3 plus a dispatch, yeah.
Okay, that's
Sorry,
where
I said 3 officers, but yes, 3
I
plus
got
a dispatch, okay. And the
Was that
12
a
fire.
correct number for fire, Mike?
As we've pointed out several times, there is not a contract between police and the city or fire and the city. The projection of 12 is what the chief and I have come up with in discussing the future of the department. I believe the firefighters, and they probably met with some of the commissioners, but they were initially seeking, I believe, 30
One.
or 31.
31.
That number hasn't been finalized.
Yeah. This is with the current pay plan and the current rate of pay in the system. And as I said, the starting salary and employee-only benefits. So whatever comes out of the union negotiations would also obviously change the value of these 12 positions as well. And if they, add any more than 12 to the ask. But the budget that I gave you in the PowerPoint that's out by 1.2 million currently includes 12 positions at this rate of pay. And so I don't want it to be lost on you that the 1.3 million in new net revenue I got from ad valorem, this adds up to 1.3 million. So,
Thank you, Joey.
yeah, that was kind of an important piece to not miss. So what are our next steps here? So the manager has met with all the department directors. Like I said, we got some prioritization. I've heard a lot of, begging and pleading over 30 years, and it's like, okay, if you got to cut something, don't cut this. So that's kind of the talks that we've had. We will continue to look for any corrections. We did find, some departments had asked for something that they didn't need to ask for. It was duplicated between technology services department and their department. Some things where they had, forgot to delete an item from last year's budget, and still had it as a request. So we've gone through and tried to look for as many simple, easy, low-hanging fruit corrections along the way that we could. When we do get some of the revenue postings from the state of Florida, I will change my projections to incorporate those. As I said, we're still looking for some additional funding sources and possible appropriations from the state. And then the manager, of course, will direct finance on what areas to adjust, which we all know that means cut. So we will, I think last year I came in with a flat top and someone noticed it and I said yes, because we had to cut everything to get the budget in. So I'm sure we will do that as well again. Now, along with that, so as far as what the growth in the ad valorem and what our expenses mean, along with and I've said this before, I know I see Jody's in the room and some other people, they have these population numbers that they get and they say, here's what the population is. I only care what the state of Florida says our population is, because that's what determines our half-cent sales tax, communication service tax, all those taxes that are based on population. So I went back through from 2001, and so this is they look at the population from the prior year also. So our 2025 budget is being based on what they call the 2024 population. So in 2001, which ties back to the same graphs at the beginning where we looked at taxable values and budget revenue, the city of Stuart, according to the state of Florida, had a population of 13,761. In 2012, it was 15,569. We actually lost population, and it dropped. And now today, as far as this budget is concerned for revenue purposes and everything else, we have a population of 19,245. As I always include, that is less about 28 inmates, which are subtracted from our number. So those 28 inmates that seem to reside in the jail in the corner that's in the city property, they subtract them. So that's an absolute true story. They list it right there in the report. Yeah. So, and to that means that we have averaged 228 people have been added to Stuart population over that time from 2001 to 2025, which is an average of 1.4% population growth over that time. And in big numbers, 13 to 19, it was 5,428, I think, was the number of total population growth in that 20-plus year span. Here we go, 5,482, not 28, 82. I'm transposing things today. That was a 1.4 year per average, 228. We did lose, as I said. And so right now, I think the last number I heard during one of the development presentations was our build-out number is 23,900. So that gives us 20 years of growth in population. I don't know if that's, that's not necessarily tied to developments or whatever, just the actual number of population counted by the state of Florida to reach that build-out number that, as I'm always concerned, the number of people attributed to City of Stuart drives our revenue numbers.
Go ahead, Commissioner.
I just think it's worth pausing here and looking at this because of all the issues we confront and all the problems we have to address. The idea that the most pressing problem is out-of-control growth for the City of Stuart just is not reflected in the figures we see. This is as close to zero, almost, as you can get. And if we project the growth to 19,245 over 20 years, that actually is a growth rate of just under 1.2%. So do we really want the city to not grow at all? Or are we willing, and does it make fiscal sense for our population to be able to grow? By the way, this includes births. So this includes families, adding children. I think we want the city to be able to accommodate a very modest 1.4 average annual growth rate to allow us to continue to thrive and prosper and have businesses that can be successful. So I just wanted to point that out.
Traffic.
Madam Mayor, thank you.
Traffic.
Commissioner.
Traffic.
Commissioner Clark? What was that? What did you say? Track?
One more time. Traffic.
Oh.
Traffic.
Traffic.
Because of having numbers of people. Okay, and I was going to ask Jolie and probably our planning person, because we're looking at property taxes as being a big part of this, and depending on whether you have multi-family or single-family, plus the commercial, I think we still do have, I know that you're saying that there's no real growth and no room for growth. That's probably on the residential side. We still have some vacant commercial that can be developed, and those bring in taxes, those bring in tax dollars. So we do have some commercial. But in terms of having, a whole single-family development with 30 or 40 or 100 single-family homes paying individual taxes, that's not in the future of the City of Stuart, unless we change the boundaries or something else happens. And even if we change the boundaries, I don't think there are any close areas of the city that has a lot of vacant land that could be developed like that. So in the future, that 2030, or even up to that 23,000, which is like our build out, there are a couple of things I want to ask you about. Maybe you can decipher what I'm saying, since I can't decipher it myself. The actual numbers, and when does the growth will stop or stabilize or just kind of level off, but we have the same amount of property paying taxes into the system. And so there was a question that said something about the CRA and what the benefit of the CRA is, and when the CRA could be sunset before 2030 or whatever the time frame is. Is there an opportunity, and maybe this is with the CRA folks, that if we don't sunset the CRA, if we change the boundaries and put, make it smaller if we need to, if we say that that's what we want, and have it in certain other areas that quote unquote need the redevelopment, but I think what happens is that when the areas need the redevelopment, if you cut off some areas from the CRA and say, okay, they've benefited for the past 30 years, let's change that, then that's where the money was coming from that goes throughout the entire CRA. So that creates a problem also.
Okay,
Yeah, I'm
I'll
just
try to.
making a
Yeah, there was a couple.
commentary,
Yeah, there was a
yeah.
couple there. So with the CRA, there are 4 distinct areas that it started as. Okay, and the public safety addition contributes nothing. So don't even, police and fire don't even try to take a bow. What happens is the money is collected off the total tax increment, and then, yes, can be spent throughout the entire CRA. So we have had sections of the CRA in the past that did not appreciate in value
Right.
at all. So they didn't add any TIF money into the fund. But because the other sections of the CRA did increase in value, those dollars were available to be spent in all the sections of the CRA.
And
So
if I could just interrupt for one
Yes, sir.
second to avoid confusion. Martin County, I believe, has up to 7 CRAs, or 6. The city of Stuart has
Has one.
one CRA. There is no North CRA, South CRA, East
Just
Stuart
one.
CRA, Downtown CRA. It's one
understand.
CRA. So if a dollar is generated within the CRA, it can be
throughout.
spent
Anywhere.
within the CRA. It just can't be spent outside of the CRA.
I know we want to,
I would echo that. So then, I think the other part of the question you were asking, does the revenue do it? So on my first slide, I was saying, wow, you should congratulate yourselves. In 24 years, you haven't even added one full mil to our tax rate. But that's due to the growth in the tax base, because the level of service you provide and the expense of that cost is what it costs.
And like I said, that tax base is single-family homes and commercial.
It's commercial, it's single family, it's the whole mix, even industrial, all that. So that whole tax base has grown in the 24 years sufficiently so that keeping a less than 1 mil increase on our tax rate has generated enough ad valorem along the way to do it. Now, again, as we always say, ad valorem in this budget is 30%. I mean, we don't collect as much ad valorem as what police and fire cost us. So we don't cover the cost of the government with property taxes. It's 30% of the pie. So then, we have to make up the rest through half-cent sales tax, communication service tax, franchise fees with FP&L, electric utility fees. And the point is, many of those other revenues are driven by our population. And so a couple years ago with David Dias, we were down to a couple $100,000, and then they amended the population number, and that population number increase gave me like $95,000 more dollars when I was looking for like 150. So that's also important as to the revenues that we share with Martin County as to what percentage of total Martin County population we are. And so as I've warned you on multiple occasions, there's going to come a time where our share of the population, we become a smaller percent of Martin County, and without doing anything wrong, we will collect less revenue simply because we're a smaller piece of the total population pie. I mean, that's just going to happen, right? We know at 20, I'm imagining like 23,900, we just, we turn off everything. Like, you can't put any more stuff. Now, there might be redevelopment after that, but, we're all imagining some point where we just freeze in time and we say we can't get any bigger, we can't do anything else. When that day comes, we're going to have to make some tough choices at that point.
Commissioner Collins?
It's a difference of how much. You said 95,000 or 100,000. Is
Well,
that the kind of
I'm just
how
saying,
much?
I was giving you a
how
real
much money is
example.
coming in from the half-cent sales tax? It's based on population.
The half-cent sales tax is absolutely based on population.
How much do we receive currently?
Oh, $1.7 million, almost 2. So, and that's just passive revenue. So for those of you in the room who haven't heard, sales tax in Florida is not distributed on where it's collected. It's distributed based on population. So it doesn't matter if they bought it in downtown Stuart. Indiantown gets a piece of it, and Ocean Breeze gets a piece of it, and everybody gets a piece of a sale in downtown Stuart. So the sales tax doesn't go where it was collected. And so again, if I have the mic, the state charges 6 cents. They take 5.5, and they send a half back to us. That's why it's literally called the half-cent sales tax, because only a half comes back to Martin County, and then that half gets distributed to the incorporated areas and unincorporated areas based on percent of population.
And the difference between when the numbers changed was $100,000, a couple $100,000.
Yeah, I mean, and so the 228 people is the average growth for each year. If one person moves into Stuart, the needle moves, but it's so small, Commissioner, you and I can't see it on my Excel sheet. Like it's
I guess I'm asking
imperceptible.
because it seems like if we're at build out almost, unless we're going to do everything at 4 stories and up and do a lot, more dense development, are we preparing for losing that money? Are we on a glide path down for not receiving that relative to the rest of Florida?
Well, that's why
Something within
that's why I run a tight ship around here.
Okay.
I mean, well, and so like the CRA is debt-free. So back to your question about the CRA, there's been a couple questions about the CRA. In that kind of 60-40 split between us and the county, if the CRA were to issue debt, one of the upsides to that is the county pays 60% of the payment, and we pay 40% of the payment. So if you were going to bond the CRA funds and say, we know that's a guaranteed revenue source at least out to the year 2040, and this county's going to pay I don't expect the county to reduce their millage below ours, but as long as the county's paying 60 and we're paying 40% of that bill, then we're debt sharing with the county on any kind of bonding that we would do in the CRA. So those are a few benefits of some of the various questions I heard.
But along Commissioner Collins' comments, there's no doubt that every conversation that Jolie and I have, we have that forecasting conversation. At what point do we get to the point
Magic
that the
number.
city is, when we get to 23,900 people, which realistically is not that far away, and you say, okay, the city's not going to have any new market or new revenue, and you say, okay, this is it. This is the magic number that's going to be the total number that's available to sustain the operations of the city. The only way to meet those needs, if the needs continue to grow, will be to increase taxes. So you will be in a position that the staff is being, or the commission is being required to cut staff, cut services, cut benefits, cut whatever else it is in order to meet those ends, because it will not be sustainable. When, historically, we showed those graphs, and if you go back, could you go back to that graph that showed the tip where it dropped off at the end? If you go right there, you can see that up until 2023, all the way back to the Great Recession, as they called it, you can see it falls off literally off a cliff in one year. But we lost, 30% of the staff in that year. We closed the Flagler Center. We closed, there was no travel. There was a lot of serious cuts. But the valuation and growth has been a pretty steady climb right back up. What we see now is that from 2022 forward, it starts to level off and then actually starts to drop to reflect on what's happened over the last few years. In the fact that we haven't had any approvals in 24, haven't had any approvals in 23, and had one approval in 22, means that the stuff that was in the pipeline has continued to CO and generate increases in revenues for the city, an increase in market value. But that's going to come to an end probably this year, or it looks like it may have actually slowed down enough last year to show it start to fall off, and it's going to go back into that slope that you see back in like 2007, where it starts to drop dramatically.
Larger market forces more than our
2007
approvals.
was market force,
Right.
but if you look at like Indigo, the Indigo development had an assessed value of about $1 million, and its new assessed value is $60 million. So the amount of new market that created is an enormous chunk of money. So when you have new development at a valuation that's current market rates, it's a significant amount of new money. Now, that was all part of the comp plan, and it was in it, and it was known that these different places were intended to be developed. historically, there were people that said, well, if you annex, that's considered sprawl. Well, in theory, that would mean that anything outside the city limits didn't get developed.
Right.
Then it might be sprawl. But the truth is, where you go south on Indian Street on Canner Highway, it doesn't turn into agriculture and farms. It still continues to be development and restaurants and housing and other things. But all of that new development are people that are coming here for the 4th of July and that are going to be on the docks and they're going to require the police and the fire services, but they're not paying the taxes into the till to pay any money toward the city's operation. So the balance is that at some point we have to find the number that we recognize we are not going to have that continued increase in market value, and this is it, and what is it that we are going to balance or remove to do it. And when we talk about like the number of employees, when you talked about, well, when I see employees, I don't even think about this year. It means absolutely nothing. What I look at is, okay, well, what are those employees going to cost in 15 years?
Right.
Because they're going to have an increase in operational costs because they're going to be paid more, they're going to have more experience, more training, et cetera. And what's the city's revenue look like in 15 years? And what are we going to do then? So Jolie and I have hours of conversation on this front.
So, and I, to dovetail off the manager's analogy, like, oh, but those people came and saw fireworks and paid half-cent sales tax. We now know that you don't collect off sales tax what you think you collect, and I'm quite sure that Indiantown and everyone else is very happy that we have a spectacular fireworks show because they get part of our sales tax. So the squeeze that we're running into is if you froze your revenues, and you say, hey, City of Stuart's taxable value is going to stay at $3 trillion, we're happy with the 19,000 people we have, whatever. So your ad valorem would remain the same. But our share of the population would decline as the rest of the areas around us grew. So other revenues shrink even though you don't do anything. Do you think that expenses are going to stay flat with us? That's why we have this talk every year, like, okay, we already see that just asking for, some additional public safety officers already, and this is not like a prepared magician show where there's a trick. I put in numbers and I put in the other number and then they come up like, oh, that equaled $1.3 million. And that equal, because I did the same thing. That's why I wanted you to notice it too. Like the $1.3 million net new revenue we got in property tax is equal to what we're asking for in additional firefighters and cops at the bottom. So then whatever their union negotiates, whatever their COLA is next year, whatever their advances, they become certified, they become a fire medic, they become a sergeant, whatever. Those things, you have to have a revenue increase to keep pace with them. And so if the property appraiser says, oh, the City of Stuart had development or redevelopment or projects, and your property tax grew by 12%, and the union said they want 11, oh, hey, that's great. I mean, they're not exactly equal, but that's what I'm saying. We want revenues to grow at a pace to keep track with that so that you don't have to go out and suddenly go to the citizens like, really, today, if we had not grown our tax base,
Right.
the citizens today would be paying 7 mills or 8 mills to generate the same amount of revenue that we did off the population and the development that was here in 2001. So that's the point I'm trying to make, is that we should celebrate what we've done. We've done growth. If we're unhappy with traffic, that's a different conversation. But I'm saying as far as what is a matter of absolute public record, the state of Florida says that's what our population is. They said that's what it's grown by, and that's what our taxable value has grown by, and we should celebrate that we haven't even added 1 mil. Our surrounding governments can't say that. Like, they can't say that.
And in order to kind of wrap up, because we're probably going
Yep.
a little bit over where we were, the plan moving forward is that obviously we need the state revenue numbers, we need to complete the union negotiations, and it's my intention to return to the commission in August with a manager's budget that's actually balanced with final numbers so the commission can go through it. And then in September, the commission has to have 2 public hearings after 5 o'clock, all the legal requirements to actually adopt the budget, but that'll be a full month after I return in August with the budget. However, between now and August, We could do it tonight, or I can do it on July 22nd. But prior to August 1st, the commission needs to set the tentative millage rate, and that is the do not exceed number. That is not to say that it's going to be the millage, but it's to say that it will be no higher than. And I asked Jolie to figure out what the millage would be to balance that budget that you just saw, and it's roughly 5.36 would be the millage rate to balance that budget without the adjustments in it. Don't have to do it today. I would recommend, though, that when you do the tentative budget, that you actually do a 5.36, because if a hurricane came or if something horrible happened, you'd have the discretion to do whatever you needed. If you picked 5, you couldn't account for anything, and if it was upside down, you'd be in a difficult situation. Ultimately, and this is what you did last year, I think you did 5.25 last year, and then stuck it at 5 even and kept the millage without moving up at all, but you adopted a not to exceed rate of 5.25 last year. So I'm happy to bring it back to you on July 22nd. I probably won't be an agenda item. It'd be more during commissioner comments or city manager comments. I'll ask you to set the rate, or you can do it tonight.
Commissioner,
I think that we should wait and do it next meeting, and maybe
Or next.
Jolie can, or Mike can give us just how the budget's shaping up in the next 2 weeks. Just this is what the out of bounds is.
I'm not likely to have the state numbers
That's
by
fine,
next
but
meeting. But
We'll just, I think we should wait till
Okay.
next week to do it. That's just my opinion.
Commissioner Clark?
Yes, I just want to say that whether or not we accept or propose that, I will not be here for the next budget hearing. I've already told the city manager about 2 months ago that I won't be here for that time in July.
All right. I would like to say, I know we're working on a budget, and none of us wants to raise our taxes. And I just want to put a plug in for our officers and our firemen, and that as we go down the road, that we do the best that we can.
I want to ask the city manager, will the fire department be presenting to us, or each department head will be presenting to us at the next budget workshop, so we can find out more about those 12 new firefighters?
I mean, I could do that. We've done that in the past. David tried that 2 years in a row and took all the directors here and had them stand here for over an hour, and 2 of them spoke. But I'm happy to do that. The problem with it is, for example, on July 22nd, there isn't a budget meeting scheduled. But when I come with the manager's budget in August, when it's complete, it's going to be based upon the union's recommended contracts that we hope are agreed upon. So if in fact the commission were to want to hear from it, it would be difficult for the director or the chief to deviate from it, because it's going to be based upon the union contract if in fact it exists. I'm happy in August to do that process where you ask about it, but I also would rather say to you, if you have any questions between now and August, it'd be a lot better for me to know where you stand in July rather than to find out in the end of August, because I'm going to be running out of time.
Well, and we're,
Okay.
and we are free to meet with them.
Oh, sure.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. Is that it? We're through then?
I'm
Thank
just
you,
here for
Jolie.
questions.
Yeah. Commissioner Collins?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I know we like having that cushion, but I would like to see it at 5 and just go from 5 and stay at 5.
I like it too. We all like it. Anyway, okay. But I did want to say one more thing, Commissioner Collins. When you mention the traffic and then we'll end it, do you mean that the traffic will stop if we stop growing?
I mean, clearly we have traffic from all around that's impacting us locally, but we also have to be honest and say some amount of this is self-inflicted as we continue to approve development, less so lately, thankfully, but it seems as though we're constantly chasing, trying to come up with enough money, and the tone here tonight has also been hoping that, you know, development will do that. But the lack of infrastructure that we have for traffic, I think, is And in light of recent traffic accidents and serious injuries, we have to really start thinking about traffic, and it can't just be about money. We have to figure out if we need to run a leaner government and have less people on payroll or whatever we have to do, but traffic and public safety and being able to navigate the city as safely as possible for people has to be that, to me, that hard line versus just trying to come up with